What contributes to this? Why does this Euro American have the sense that whatever society is going, it is faster than it used to be? Is this simple? Is this simple its own exaggeration? That is, if everything is exaggerated, then a sense of movement is true. For for whence the exaggeration then? There cannot there can be no single source to point to, but there is an enabling factor. This is the cultural place that is given to enablement itself. Euro Americans imagine that they can do more things that they once did, crystallized in the hypostatization of technology as enabling. Technology has always had this capacity, so to speak, and in this its characteristics remains thoroughly in traditionally embedded in earlier expectations. At the same time, technology contributes to the way in which late 20th century Euro Americans perceive an overall enhancement of human ability. Reproductive and genetic technologies provide ample illustration. It has not taken commentators long to point out that the same reproductive technologies, such as EVF and embryo transfer, that enable families to achieve their traditional goals by having children of their own, also lay the grounds for innovation and unconventional arrangements. The virgin bird's furor over artificial insemination was an example of this. Those who became worried about the way women were seeking pregnancy suddenly saw how the means to overcome physical impairment could be used for quite unanticipated social ends. Procedures that may enable persons to fulfill their desires do not determine their kinds of choices into which such desires may be channeled. Choice is a significant value to which Euro Americans give weight in setting up families, and EVF and associated procedures widen the choice that is available to potential parents, regardless of their fertility, as does gamete donation in surrogacy arrangements. Couples may thus be enabled to preserve aspects of a biological connection to a child, even where they cannot provide the whole. We may call these ties based on status. Choice is also an arbiter in what is closer to a kind of implicit contract. The unfolding of social ties are they develop within a family. Is this overtly manifest is how people choose to keep up with their kin, whom they regard as their intimates, how far away from their family they try to escape. A British colleague claims that her family was in any case never a family by blood and cannot understand why such fuss is made of genetic relationships. Her family, she says, is a family founded on choice. She also adds that in turn people often do not understand the strength of her feeling of obligation. In their view, her family are only friends, not family. She may have been reassured reassured them by an editorial in the New York Times that asserted friendship, not kindship, in the tide is the tie that binds. The writer claims an adopted array of cousins, uncles, and aunts who are her elective family. What blinds us is friendship. Now there are no particular technologies involved here, any more than in the case of the children who divorced their parents. I will suggest, however, that developments in reproductive technology have made newly explicit the possibility of choosing whom and what one desires to call family. In opening up ways of thinking, they offer a cultural enablement of a kind. The climate of enablement that depicts a world where choices may be put into effect may lead to more traditionalization of family life, more status, preserving some elements of a biological tie in ways that were never possible before, or else to more detraditionalization, more contract, creating a general climate in which desire is seen to be legitimate and determining. This particular detraditionalizing is also retraditionalizing in another guise, as Janet Fink 1989 has observed. There always was a strong elective component to the enactment of family relationships, and those families that base themselves on choice, symbolized by friendship, claim traditional virtues in attending to the quality of interpersonal relations. It was the failure of the parents in question to honor the relational side of the bargain, so to speak, that led to the child divorces I referred to at the beginning. If I suggest that new technologies have created a context in which such non technological negotiations make cultural sense, I will also suggest that the enablement is most evident when the principal role of technology is seen to be that of facilitator. It does not always appear so. Technological procedures may bring painful choices for practitioners in the field of reproductive medicine, as Frances Priest, 1993, has observed. Writing about genetic technologies for a popular audience, the Nuffield professor of clinical medicine at Oxford put this dilemma. New problems are arising as a result of the application of DNA technology to genetic screening. For example, prenatal diagnosis of genetic diseases often requires that we are absolutely certain about the biological parentage of the fetus. Indeed, it may be necessary to run paternity tests on fetal material to ensure that a particular diagnosis is correct. What are we to do if we demonstrate non-paternity? Who should, who should be told, and what is the doctor's decision when he or she knows that information of this type may have a disastrous effect on a family? As our diagnostic technology becomes more sophisticated, there will be many other examples of sensitive information acquired by chance. Waterell, 1991. In short, being absolutely certain about paternity brings with it uncertainty about how best to handle the information. Yet even here, there is one sense in which the role of technology remains that of facilitator. The technology that is enabling of genetic certainty is not disabling of that. It simply brings to light a pre-existing state, the information already contained by the genes. Disability and uncertainty come afterwards in how to use the information. The case is a classic one. Not too much technology, but too much knowledge. Knowledge that comes from such testing gives a modern way, genetic identification, of being certain about a traditional category of parentage, biological fatherhood, but it is also a traditional way establishing biological connection of defining a thoroughly modern kind of patronage, specifically certain fatherhood. The need to know the genetic connection originally arose in the context of social arrangement that turned on what were regarded as the foundations for family life. The need to know the father arises now in the context, among others, of medical concern to provide persons with as good as possible genetic foundation to their lives. There are several displacements going on here, but taken together, the end result seems simultaneously and more uncertainty, more certainty and more uncertainty. Perhaps it was always a condition of modernist Euro-American knowledge practices that uncertainties increase as fast as certainties are established. Each horizon exposed more terrain, one of the sources of the sense of movement on to which I referred earlier. Knowledge applied to social matter precipitates inevitable questions about how to choose this or that course of action on the basis of the information being conveyed, thereby recreating the division into what we can choose and what we have to take for granted. Yet the incremental effect seems given, and if it is a given, does it lie then in something we as Euro Americans do take for granted? Not in what we think we assume, but in what we do assume. We think we take tradition for granted because that is its substantive status. In fact, as naming it makes pain, tradition emerges as highly liable, sometimes contested, uncertainly explicit category. That does not mean the Euro-Americans take nothing for granted. Is elsewhere altogether. I suspect that, above all, they take for granted, quite simple, that given the technology, they can do anything. If technology is society made durable, it is at the same time ability made effective. The enabling effect of technology is guarantee of that. Choice comes afterwards. Sever ourselves from our disabilities, and then we shall see how we want to live and how we want to create the certain identity we feel, like children severing themselves from unsatisfactory parents. The analogy is not too far-fetched. In reporting on the kinds of expectation to which the Human Genome Project has given rise in the public at large, Nancy Waxler talks of the effort still required when tests use linked DNA makers. A major problem in presymptomatic and prenatal testing using linked DNA markers is that the whole family must be involved. 1992. By contrast, she then goes on to say, when we have the gene in hand and can detect directly the specific mutation in the gene, we will only need to look at that individual's DNA. In the meanwhile, practitioners are faced with the cumbersome method of investigating entire families. In her words, the tedious way of doing diagnostic testing, but until the gene itself can be found, it is the only way. The family that provides information is thus also a disability in the trouble it affords, including the new troubles that will come with relaying information back to it, as we have seen. But technology will, in the end, enable us to sever ourselves from our disabilities. If I conclude on a skeptical note, it is not because there are no benefits and advantages to be waged up here. Rather, it is to observe how much value Euro Americans place on their ability to do things, including doing things to their sense of identity. But then again, they enhance their abilities only to enhance their critics of them at the same time. There will always be more of both. Thus, their odd idioms and curious habits or thought will lead them to ask where valuing this particular value enablement will lead them. Acknowledgements. I am grateful to the members of the Faculty of Social Science at the Open University whose questions on another paper stimulated the formation of this one. An earlier version of the present text was first given to the Center of the Study of Cultural Values at the University of Lancaster, who have published it as a lecture. Occasional Papers, 1984.